This story is titled, Mom and Dad Cut Me Off After Golden Sister's Lies. She cheated, I stayed friends with X, now I'm rich, she's begging to fund her wedding. Hey everyone, I'm 29 years old and my twin sister Jessica hasn't spoken to me in 3 years. Not only that, but she somehow managed to convince our parents to stop talking to me too. All for what has to be the most absurd reason you could possibly imagine. Let me tell you the whole story so you can understand just how ridiculous this situation really is. Jessica was getting divorced from her husband Nathan, who happened to be my best friend. Nathan and I met back in college and became really close over the years. My sister and I, on the other hand, were never particularly close growing up. Even though we're twins, she's 16 minutes younger than me, and that small difference somehow translated into her always being treated like the baby of the family, the golden child. Our parents were noticeably soft on Jessica but tough on me, which created a lot of resentment between us growing up. Jessica always got her way, turning her into something of a spoiled brat who wasn't exactly easy to get along with. I tried my best to maintain a relationship with her, but the dynamic our parents created made it incredibly difficult. I still remember when Nathan first saw Jessica. He had found a family photo on my social media and immediately asked me to introduce them, saying he was completely smitten with her at first sight. I initially refused. Mixing friendships and family can get messy, but Nathan was persistent. He kept asking for weeks, and eventually, I gave in. I finally talked to Jessica about it. Nathan was a good friend, and honestly, I didn't see any harm in introducing them at that point. She agreed to meet him, and they hit it off immediately. They started dating during our first year of college and stayed together for 6 years before getting engaged. I was genuinely happy for them. Their relationship actually made Jessica more bearable to be around. I was even Nathan's best man at their wedding, and couldn't have been prouder to see my best friend and sister starting a life together. But 2 years into their marriage, everything fell apart. Jessica cheated on Nathan with a coworker. Nathan found out by checking her phone after becoming suspicious of her behavior. When he confronted her about it, she admitted to the affair, but claimed she was just bored and that it meant nothing. She even offered to break things off with the other guy and suggested they could work on their marriage. But Nathan wasn't interested in reconciliation, which, to be honest, was completely understandable given the circumstances. Nathan left Jessica immediately after discovering her infidelity, and that's when things really started to get ugly. The divorce proceedings quickly turned bitter and hostile. What made the situation even worse was Jessica's audacity throughout the whole ordeal. She actually had the nerve to demand alimony from Nathan, even though she was the one who cheated and had a steady job at the time. Her entitlement was truly baffling to me. I sided with Nathan through the whole divorce process because, frankly, Jessica was completely in the wrong. We weren't particularly close anyway, so I didn't feel any obligation to take her side just because we shared the same DNA. My decision to support Nathan didn't sit well with Jessica at all. She went crying to our parents, complaining that I was being disloyal and claiming that as family, I should automatically be on her side regardless of the circumstances. For some ridiculous reason, our parents actually agreed with her logic. They called a family meeting, one of those dreadful interventions where everyone sits around looking serious, and told me I needed to cut ties with Nathan because he had supposedly wronged Jessica. I told them their demand was completely ridiculous. Nathan had been my friend for years, and I wasn't about to abandon him just because Jessica had made poor choices. I made it clear that if Nathan had been the one who cheated, it would have been different, but Jessica was clearly in the wrong here. Jessica got absolutely furious when I refused to distance myself from Nathan. She accused me of deliberately sabotaging her divorce settlement and even had the audacity to claim that I was jealous of her. After years of dealing with her entitled behavior, I finally lost my patience. I told her straight up that she didn't deserve anything from Nathan because she had demonstrated she had no morals or ethics. The argument escalated quickly, voices raised and accusations flying, until I had to leave early before things got even worse. A few days later, I received a call from my parents that would change everything. They informed me they were cutting me off completely because Jessica had given them an ultimatum. Either they choose her or they lose her. Unsurprisingly, they chose her without hesitation, just as they had always prioritized her throughout our lives. They even had the nerve to tell me I could fix everything by simply cutting Nathan out of my life. But by that point, it had become a matter of principle for me. I wished them well and stopped speaking to them. It's been 3 years since that day. Nathan and I are still good friends, and I haven't spoken to my family at all in that time. I occasionally see them in passing, but we just avoid each other. It hurts knowing that my parents chose Jessica over me so easily. but I've come to terms with it. I've built a life for myself without them, focusing on my career and the relationships that actually matter, with people who respect and value me. Recently, my parents decided to pay me a visit out of the blue. Unfortunately, it wasn't to apologize for cutting me out of their lives. They came to ask for my help. I've been making good money lately since my business has really taken off. I own this amazing bistro downtown that, after receiving an incredible review from a popular food blogger, has been absolutely packed with customers for months. I guess my parents did the math and decided to reach out because they needed money. Here's the plot twist. They didn't need the money for themselves. It was for Jessica. Apparently, she's getting married again, and you'll never guess who the lucky guy is. It's that coworker she had the affair with. They've been together since her divorce from Nathan and got engaged a couple of months ago. I already knew about the engagement, not because I was invited to the wedding, of course not, but because news travels through mutual acquaintances. I didn't think much about it at the time. About 4 days ago, my parents showed up at my door unannounced. I was pretty surprised to see them standing there after 3 years of silence. They were being polite enough, so I invited them in. I didn't just shut the door in their faces, first because I'm not that kind of person, and second because I made the mistake of assuming they were there to mend things, maybe even apologize. That was definitely my mistake. After some awkward small talk about my life and business, they finally got to the point of their visit. They told me Jessica was getting married again and wanted to make it a grand event. According to them, she wanted people to forget about her first wedding and only remember this one, which sounded exactly like something Jessica would do. I wasn't surprised at all by her thinking. Then they started talking about the budget, and that's when things got absolutely shocking. They said the wedding was going to cost at least $50,000 for the luxurious event Jessica had envisioned. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. We weren't the kind of family that could afford something like that. My dad was a recently retired architect, and my mom was a university chemistry professor. Both earned decent money when they worked and had saved reasonably for their future. But spending $50,000 on a wedding was completely unthinkable for our family's financial situation. My parents explained that the wedding was still several months away, so they didn't need the money immediately. They admitted they could afford to contribute some from their retirement savings, but there was no way they could cover the full cost. The fiancé's family had already said they couldn't help financially, but my parents didn't want Jessica to feel disappointed. So, without thinking it through, they had already committed to covering the entire wedding cost before Jessica started planning and before she shared the actual budget. Now they were in a bind, not knowing what to tell her because there was no way they could pay for it without seriously affecting their retirement funds. They told me they had heard from some people that my bistro was doing well and took it as a sign from the universe that they should visit me and talk about contributing to the wedding expenses. With completely straight faces, they told me this wedding meant everything to Jessica. Apparently, after her divorce from Nathan, she had to go to therapy because of how traumatizing the experience had been for her. My parents had the audacity to tell me that now I had the chance to be a good brother for once and contribute to Jessica's wedding. They reminded me that the last time Jessica asked for something, for me to cut ties with Nathan, I refused, and we ended up not talking for 3 years. According to them, I now had an opportunity to fix things by covering her wedding costs. To be honest, I thought they were joking at first. There was no way they could seriously believe that even if I were a billionaire, I would contribute a single cent to Jessica's wedding. And I told them exactly that. But only after laughing directly in their faces. I couldn't believe they had the audacity to come to me after 3 years without even apologizing and act like I was the one in the wrong for cutting ties with them instead of with Nathan. After my laughing and blunt refusal, my parents were deeply offended. Instead of leaving, they started arguing with me, saying there was nothing funny about the situation. They claimed Jessica was right all along about me having no sense of family loyalty, even now when being presented with what they called a golden opportunity to mend things with my sister. This time, my parents went even further, accusing me of being jealous and insecure about my sister. They even called me incredibly stingy. That really set me off. I could understand Jessica saying those things. She's delusional and selfish. But my parents knew exactly what they had done to our relationship over the years. I completely lost it at that point. I told them they had no right to lecture me about family loyalty because they were the reason Jessica and I didn't get along in the first place. I reminded them how they had always treated us differently, how they had spoiled her excessively while expecting me to put up with everything. I told them they had failed as parents, and that's why Jessica had become a selfish monster who didn't even care about them. I pointed out that it was perfectly fine with Jessica to ask them to pay for such a lavish wedding, knowing it was well beyond their means. I added that it was their fault that even I, their son, wasn't willing to help them. Maybe they thought at least one of their children cared about them, but if Jessica truly cared, she wouldn't have asked them to cover such an extravagant cost. She would have done the math and realized it was way beyond the budget of a moderately successful architect and professor. She would have scaled down the wedding or figured out a way to pay for it herself. But she didn't care about any of that. She only cared about herself. As for me, I told them I didn't feel the need to care about my parents either. It's not like they cared about me when they chose Jessica over our relationship. At the end of the day, it was their own behavior that left them with two children who didn't bother thinking about them. They had no one to blame but themselves for the situation they were in. After I said all this, my mom started crying, and my dad cursed at me before leaving with her. In the moment, I didn't feel bad at all. I was too angry to care. But a few hours later, I got a text from my dad saying he was deeply disappointed in me, and that my words had broken his heart. He said my mom was in terrible shape because of me, which made me start wondering if I was the bad guy for telling my parents that their two children don't care about them, and that it's their own fault. After a week of thinking about the confrontation and reading some responses from others I've spoken to about the situation, it's clear that I have nothing to feel guilty about. It's been a week since I spoke to them, and now I've blocked them completely. It's ironic that my dad unblocked me just to send that guilt-tripping message, considering he hadn't bothered to check on me in 3 years. It only shows how selfish and insensitive they truly are. For the record, I don't care about their feelings because I truly don't, and that's the honest truth. Some of you have asked about Nathan and how he's handling all of this. Yes, he knew Jessica was getting married again. She posted about her engagement a couple of months ago on social media, and that's when he found out. So he's been aware for some time and is completely fine with it. Their divorce was really messy and awful for both of them, but I guess the whole process helped him get over her. Now he has no feelings for her at all. Nathan didn't date anyone for a while after the divorce, but last year he started seeing people again. He's doing well now, and we try to catch up every couple of weekends. When I told Nathan about my parents' visit and their request for me to pay for Jessica's second wedding, he said I did the right thing by refusing. We even laughed about how Jessica apparently had to go to therapy after the divorce because she was so traumatized. According to what we both remember, it was Jessica who lied about Nathan to make him look like the villain during the divorce proceedings, just so she could get the alimony she wanted and justify her infidelity. I honestly don't understand why she needed therapy when she was the one traumatizing everyone else with her behavior and lies. Anyway, I've decided to keep my distance from my parents and stop talking to them again. That's the best thing for my mental health at this point. I hope they don't contact me again, as I'd hate to have to get dragged back into this mess. I've built a good life for myself since cutting ties with them, and I don't need their drama disrupting my peace. Second update about the whole situation. About 2 weeks ago, my parents paid me that visit that didn't end well at all. Afterward, I blocked them and hoped they wouldn't contact me again. But today they called me again. They must have used a disposable phone because I didn't recognize the number. They called while I was working at the bistro, and I was quite distracted at the time, so I ended up answering, thinking it might be an important call related to the business. As soon as I heard my dad's voice, I was about to hang up, but he said he was outside my bistro and was desperate to talk to me. He insisted on meeting for coffee and said he couldn't leave without speaking to me. I tried to tell him I was busy at work and would be tied up for the next several hours, but he said he was willing to wait. He sounded really desperate, which started to make me feel a little worried. I reluctantly agreed to meet him, partly because I was concerned he might come into my bistro and cause a scene otherwise. He didn't explicitly say that, but it felt like a possibility, which was the last thing I wanted for my business. After the call, I couldn't focus on work. I was too distracted and upset. I decided to take a break and went to meet him at the nearby cafe he'd mentioned. When I saw him sitting inside, I approached him right away and told him what he was doing was completely unacceptable. I made it clear he couldn't show up at my workplace and essentially harass me because he wanted money. To my surprise, he said he wasn't there to talk about money. He wanted to talk about my mom. That caught me completely off guard. My dad proceeded to explain everything. After our last conversation, my mom had completely broken down and hadn't been the same since. Even though 2 weeks had passed, she hadn't recovered at all and had become a shadow of her former self. He claimed there was only one thing that could help her: me visiting her and talking to her. My dad also seemed genuinely distressed, which put me in a very difficult position. I didn't want to hurt him intentionally, but at the same time, I didn't feel obligated to visit my mom. She hadn't bothered to reach out to me in the last 3 years, and our relationship had been terrible for a long time before that. After thinking it over carefully, I told my dad I didn't have the time to go see her. Even if I agreed to visit, I didn't know what he expected me to say. It would be a lie to say I'd forgiven them because I hadn't. I couldn't forgive them, especially since they'd never apologized for choosing Jessica over me or for the years of favoritism that damaged our relationship. My dad became visibly upset when I said I wouldn't visit my mom. He said she was in an extremely bad emotional state because of what I had said last time about neither of their children caring about them. To be fair, my mom has always been very sensitive and emotionally fragile. It didn't take much to make her cry or hurt her feelings, even when we were kids. Everyone in the family knew we had to tread carefully when speaking to her. I agreed with him that my mom is a deeply sensitive person, but pointed out that I'm also a sensitive person. If she can't move past things, neither can I. I tried to explain this to my dad, but he insisted that I needed to put our differences aside for once and visit her because she had completely broken down. At one point, we were just going in circles with the conversation. I finally had to put my foot down and firmly told him I wasn't going to visit anyone until both of them apologized to me. Even then, I would need time to think it over. I reminded him that for the past 3 years, they hadn't spoken to me at all, and before that, they hadn't treated me well. Naturally, it had become very difficult to see them the same way I used to, or to care about them anymore. I explained that I've built a life for myself without them, and they didn't seem to care about me until they needed something, whether it was me personally or more specifically my money. I also mentioned how hurt I'd been when they cut me out of their lives, but that didn't seem to matter to them at the time. They hadn't reached out to me or checked on me afterward, even though I was deeply affected. Feeling hurt and frustrated by the whole situation, I told my dad I wouldn't visit mom and that I was very busy running my bistro. I warned him that if he harassed me at work again, I wouldn't hesitate to call the police. I also made it clear I didn't want them visiting me anywhere, not just at work. I emphasized how serious I was about this boundary, then left to return to my bistro. I had a lot to take care of, and this unwanted interruption had already cost me valuable time. I thought my dad might try something else later in the day, but fortunately, nothing else happened. I don't know what's going to happen next, but I'm exhausted by all of this family drama. I regret ever letting them back into my life in the first place, even for that brief, disastrous conversation. Third update on the situation. I'm back with another update, but thankfully not because of any direct interaction with my parents. Well, technically yes, they're involved, but at least I haven't had to speak with them directly. Before I get into the update, I want to address someone who suggested I should have called the police on my dad immediately. They accused me of being a pushover for not doing so. I'm guessing that person has never run a restaurant business before, because if they had, they'd know it's terrible for business to have police officers show up in the middle of service. If I hadn't agreed to meet my dad, he probably would have come inside and caused a scene, which would have been just as bad, if not worse. People pay good money to enjoy a peaceful dining experience at my bistro, not to deal with someone shouting or to watch the police walk in. I made the best decision I could in that moment to protect my business. Anyway, moving on to the actual update. Even though I haven't had a good relationship with my immediate family for the past 3 years, I've managed to maintain positive relationships with other relatives. Everyone in the extended family knows we had a falling out years ago and that we haven't been in contact since. They also know the reason why, but no one wanted to get involved in the drama, so they've stayed neutral. For events like weddings, birthdays, or parties, they've invited me and my parents separately to avoid any awkward confrontations. Recently, one of my cousins announced her pregnancy, and I noticed my parents hadn't been invited to the celebration party. When I asked her about it, thinking it might have been because of me, she told me that wasn't the case at all. Instead, she'd had a minor argument with my sister Jessica a few weeks before the party. This happened around the time my cousin posted her pregnancy announcement online. Apparently, Jessica accused my cousin of trying to steal the spotlight. Jessica believed that my cousin had deliberately gotten pregnant to overshadow her wedding, which had taken place just a couple of months earlier. The accusation was so absurd that my cousin decided to cut ties with Jessica altogether. She didn't want to deal with that kind of negativity while she was pregnant. And honestly, who can blame her? As a result, my cousin decided not to invite my parents to the party either. They had taken it upon themselves to contact her parents, my aunt and uncle, and accuse my cousin of being selfish and spoiled for making such a big deal about her pregnancy, knowing Jessica's wedding was just a few months prior. Because of this ridiculous behavior, I was the only one in my immediate family who was invited to the celebration. My cousin knew I had nothing to do with their behavior and made it clear that the decision to exclude them was entirely based on their own actions, not mine. Still, my parents decided to blame me for it anyway. They went online and made a public statement claiming they had stayed silent about my supposedly jealous and insecure behavior toward Jessica for a long time to protect my reputation. But now, since I had supposedly turned the family against them, they felt they had no choice but to speak out. They implied it was my fault that my cousin didn't invite them to the pregnancy announcement party. On top of that, they painted me as the villain for staying friends with Nathan, despite how he had allegedly ruined Jessica's mental health during their divorce. Of course, they conveniently left out the fact that Jessica had been cheating on Nathan the entire time. Why would they include that crucial detail in their post? It wouldn't fit their narrative. They called me selfish, insecure, and a loser. They even said they were happy to no longer call me their son because they were going to disinherit me. I wish I could say I cared about that threat, but I really don't. Plenty of people sent me screenshots of the post since I couldn't see it myself. I'm still blocked by them on social media. I told everyone not to bother arguing with my family because it's clear they've lost all sense of reason at this point. No one who actually matters will believe a word of what they said, so it's not doing any real damage to my reputation. Let them talk. I'm so far above all this nonsense now. At the same time, I'm incredibly grateful for the relatives who have supported me. While they've stayed out of the drama so far, I'm confident they'll all steer clear of my parents and Jessica from now on after this public tantrum. Fourth update on this whole mess. It's been a couple of months since my last update because honestly, there wasn't much to talk about. After the statement my parents posted online blaming me for everything that had gone wrong, most of our extended family practically stopped talking to them. I'm sure my parents would have blamed me for that too. But at this point, there was no use in making more posts against me. The damage to their relationships had already been done. They had reached a point of no return with most of the family. As for me, I was pretty happy without them in my life, and now I'm even happier. I recently learned from a few relatives who are still in touch with my parents that Jessica has apparently cut ties with them as well. My parents weren't present at her wedding, which took place a few weeks ago, raising a lot of questions among the few family members who attended. Some relatives decided to ask my parents what was going on, and my parents told them they had informed Jessica that her wedding budget was way beyond their means and that they couldn't afford it. This led to a huge fight because Jessica was furious that they had promised to cover all the expenses but were now going back on their word. My parents explained to her that they had made those promises assuming her plans would be within a reasonable budget. However, her plans were far too extravagant, and they also needed to think about their own financial future since they are now both retired. Jessica didn't take this well at all. Being the spoiled child she is, she decided to cut them off entirely and make her fiancé and his family pay for the wedding instead. This forced her to significantly downsize the wedding to something much more modest than what she had originally planned. She ended up having the wedding without her parents present. From what I've heard, Jessica doesn't seem affected by any of this, but my parents are reportedly very upset. From what I've been told, they're extremely disappointed that neither of their children seems to care about them anymore, which is fair because, as I said from the beginning, this is the reality they created for themselves. In any case, I'm doing well, so I don't care much about this family drama anymore. It just goes to show that you can't escape karma. It catches up to you eventually. That's exactly what happened to my parents, and soon enough, it will catch up to Jessica too. Honestly, at this point, I wish them luck. They're going to need it. Fifth update on this crazy situation. I didn't think I'd have anything else to share about this saga, but life keeps throwing surprises my way. Here's the latest development. First, about Jessica. Karma isn't done with her yet. I recently heard from some relatives that Jessica has been unfaithful to her new husband. From what I've been told, her husband and Jessica no longer work together because he accepted a new job at a different company. This left Jessica at her old workplace, and apparently she wasted no time starting an affair with a new coworker. I don't know all the details, but I do know it's someone who recently joined the company. Keep in mind, it hasn't even been 2 years since her wedding to this guy. What I've heard is that Jessica and her husband are going through a serious marital crisis. There hasn't been any talk of divorce yet, but things aren't looking good for their relationship. Honestly, I'm surprised, but also not really, given how she behaved during her first marriage. All I can say is that I hope her husband is prepared for what's coming. If there's one thing I've learned about Jessica, it's that she makes outrageous demands during divorces, and she already has experience with the process. Maybe this is karma for her husband too, though I wouldn't wish being married to Jessica on my worst enemy. As for my parents, I've heard a few new things about them as well. Ever since Jessica cut ties with them, things have only gone downhill. At first, they thought Jessica would come back to them, especially after her new marriage began to show cracks. But that hasn't happened. Jessica is still not speaking to them at all. I've been told they're becoming increasingly depressed and isolated. Some relatives have tried to reach out to them, but my parents have rejected their help. I think they're starting to realize how their actions have affected the entire family, but they're not ready to admit it or to change their behavior. Looks like my sister is heading for her second divorce. At this rate, she might start collecting them like trophies.